Let's go. Actually, want to start with a quick story. 3 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I chose to leave my position on staff here at Grace and move my family to Virginia Beach to become a clinical psychologist. About a year into that training program, everything fell apart for me. I had this wild experience with panic disorder, which if you'd like to know more about that, I'm happy to share about it. We can have coffee or jump on a Zoom and I can share about that experience. But things fell apart and I had to withdraw from the program. I found myself in a position where I had moved my family away from all of our friends and all of our community. We were isolated in Virginia Beach. I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school. I had 2 kids that we had to take care of. We were in a really, really bad position as a family. So I called Pastor John and I called Pastor Derek. I called Grace and I said, listen, first of all, I don't expect anything. I'm fully aware that I decided to leave. But I want you to know that here's what's happened to me, and I would jump at any chance I could have to come back on staff full time. Any role, any job, I don't care. I would jump at the chance. And they began working immediately to find a way to bring me back on staff full time. I tell you that because a short time ago, a pastor who I first worked for in my early 20s gave me a call, and he was working for a new church, and he wanted me to come work for him. He offered me a job opportunity. He said that the board at his new church had authorized him to do whatever he needed to do to get me to come work for them. And he was kind of putting on the full court press for me to leave Grace again and go work for him at this new church. And I'll tell you what, when he called me with that opportunity, there was an immediate reaction in my heart and in my mind. And it was this: not a chance. There's no way. If he only knew the gratitude I had in my heart to Grace Community Church, if he only knew the extent to which Grace was there for me when me and my family needed it most, if he only knew how Grace rescued us out of maybe the worst position we'd ever been in as a family, he would know that I'm never gonna leave. That I am forever indebted to this community and this church. And it is 100% fueled by gratitude. 100% fueled by gratitude. So listen, it's when you read Romans chapter 8, verses 11 through 17, I want you to read those words with this in mind. This idea that someone can be so overwhelmed with gratitude that it guides their entire life. That they can be so overwhelmed with gratitude that it guides every decision they make. Because that's what Paul does here. In 11 and 12, he starts with, but if and so then. And he's basically saying, in light of all that Jesus has accomplished, in light of all that Jesus has done for you, it's that you have to keep in mind. In light of the fact that it was Jesus' death and resurrection that enabled your death and resurrection. And don't forget about your death and resurrection. How you used to walk according to the flesh, but now you have the opportunity to walk according to the Spirit. How there was a moment when your eyes were opened and your heart was awakened to life in its truest form because of who Jesus was and what Jesus did. That moment was so powerful for you that you began to see your life in 2 parts. Part 1 is part of your life that you lived according to the flesh. You chased worldly desires. You pursued temporary pleasures and you made good things God things, and you kind of lived apart from God. You lived selfishly. That was part 1 of your life. But then part 2 of your life, after your eyes were awakened and your heart was opened to who Jesus really was and what life really was, part 2 of your life. Now, God can be God alone in my heart, and every other good thing can be just a good thing, but it doesn't have to be God. You became free from that. You became free to live a new life according to the Spirit, with your minds set on things above, eternal things, lasting things. Every breath you take in part 2 of your life has a new purpose and a new end in mind. Paul says, in light of all that Christ has accomplished for you, he says this in verse 12, we are under obligation. And he uses this Greek word ophiletus, which means an ower, which means someone who is indebted, someone who is under obligation. But it's someone who is under obligation because their heart is so full of gratitude. They say, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful. Like I owe you everything. I owe everything to you. I'll never go back to this other way of living. I'll never go back to being part one of my life. I owe everything. And Paul says, that's who we are. That's who we are. We're under obligation. And our hearts are so full with gratitude for what Jesus accomplished for us. We'll never go back. We'll never go back to living by the flesh. We're under obligation to live by the Spirit. Listen, my time is up. I'm over time, but I have one question for you. Have you ever allowed the truth about what Jesus has accomplished for you? Have you ever allowed that truth to sink in and take root in your heart? Have you ever meditated on that to the extent that it takes root in your heart and it has the opportunity to explode into the kind of overwhelming gratitude that might guide the rest of your life?